They said it was just an urban legend until they vanished. These 15 true horror tales are drawn from real encounters, each darker than the last. The scariest part? Every word might be real. It was the kind of night shift that made even the most seasoned nurses grit their teeth. Rain slashed at the old windows of Stanton Memorial Hospital, a relic of the 1950s whose funding had long since run dry. The upper floors had been closed off years ago, and the only patients now were in the critical care ward on the first floor. Most of the staff had long since transferred out. Only a skeleton crew remained. 2 nurses, 1 overnight doctor, a guard who rarely left the front desk, and the janitor, a quiet man named Edwin whose eyes were too still for comfort. Clara Jennings, 29, had transferred to Stanton out of necessity rather than choice. Her mother had just passed, and she needed to be close to home. The pay was poor, the equipment outdated, but she could manage. What she couldn't explain, however, was the strange feeling that came over her every time she entered the hospital, like stepping into a vacuum. Sounds were muted, light flickered a second too long, and sometimes she could swear she heard footsteps coming from the upper floors, always the upper floors. Ignore it. Margie, the older nurse who trained her, had told her on the first night, "This place talks sometimes, but if you don't talk back, it'll leave you be." Clara thought Margie was just being colorful. That changed on the night of October 14th, her last shift at Stanton. It began with the silence. Real silence, not the ambient hum of machines or the occasional moan from a patient. The hallway felt hushed, expectant, like something holding its breath. Clara had been doing her usual rounds, checking vitals and adjusting medication drips, when she noticed room 100 First monitor had gone completely dead. The man in 104, Harold Blythe, had been unconscious for weeks. Severe car accident. No visitors. No known relatives. But still alive until now, it seemed. She entered the room with her portable vitals kit, her shoes whispering across the tile. The heart monitor wasn't just turned off. It was unplugged, the cable neatly coiled on the floor. Strange. She had no recollection of disconnecting it. She leaned over Harold to check his pulse when the room light blinked once. Then again. The overhead fluorescent stuttered, buzzing softly, then steadied. She pressed her fingers to Harold's wrist. A pulse. Weak, but there. He was still alive. But then, from behind her, she heard a voice, barely audible. "He's not the one." Clara spun around. No one. The hall was empty, lights dimmed low for the night. She took a step back toward Harold and felt something brush past her. Cold air. A flick of something unseen. Clara's hands trembled as she reconnected the vitals and returned to the nurse's station, her mind racing. Was it Margie messing with her? A hallucination from too much caffeine and too little sleep? Margie was in the break room, asleep with a paperback open on her chest. The security guard was nowhere to be seen, and the doctor on call, Dr. Van Eck, was probably in the staff lounge as usual. Clara debated waking someone but decided against it. There was probably a reasonable explanation. Hospitals were full of odd noises and stranger coincidences. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling. That whisper hadn't sounded like a hallucination. It had sounded intentional. She tried to occupy herself by restocking the supply cart, her back turned to the main hallway. As she reached for a box of syringes on the top shelf, the lights in the hallway behind her flicked off. One by one. Click, click, click. Darkness crawling toward her. Then silence. Clara turned around slowly, holding the box like a shield. The hallway was pitch black. Only the emergency exit sign at the end glowed red, casting long shadows. She stepped out into the corridor, the air suddenly colder than before, and then she heard it again. Footsteps from the upper floors. Deliberate, measured. She ran back to the nurse's station and called security. No answer. Of course, she muttered, slamming the receiver down. She opened the drawer beneath the desk and took out the old walkie-talkie assigned to emergency use. Station to front desk. Brian, you there? A burst of static. Then, don't go upstairs. Her blood froze. Brian? She whispered. Static. Then nothing. She looked up and saw Margie now standing in the hallway. Her face pale. You heard it too, didn't you? Margie asked, her voice almost a whisper. Clara nodded. Margie walked forward slowly. This place isn't just old, Clara. It's occupied. There's a reason they shut down the upper floors. Clara's skin prickled. What do you mean? They moved the psych ward upstairs in the 70s. After that, things got bad. Patients started disappearing. One nurse lost her mind and jumped from the 3rd floor. Staff left in droves. They closed it all up in '85, sealed the stairwells, welded shut the elevator controls for the upper levels. Then how do I keep hearing footsteps? Clara asked. Margie didn't respond. Instead, she opened a drawer and handed her a small, leather-bound book. Read this later. It's the logbook from Nurse Eliza Green. She worked here until 1984. She saw everything. Before Clara could reply, the hallway lights blinked on again. The hum of machines resumed, and the hospital returned to its eerie semblance of normal. The rest of the night passed slowly. Every sound, every shadow made Clara flinch. When her shift ended at 6 a.m., she hurried home without saying goodbye. She stayed up reading the journal. Nurse Green's entries began as mundane notes about patients and medication changes. But soon they shifted. She wrote of seeing shadowy figures watching from the stairwells, of patients claiming that they hear the doctors from above. She described a girl in a hospital gown walking the halls, her face always turned away. And always those footsteps. The final entry chilled Clara. October 13, 1984. They came again last night. This time they whispered my name. I can't stay here. Something is wrong in this hospital. It's not the patients, they're scared too. It's them, whatever they are. If you find this book, don't go looking. Don't go upstairs. Once they know you can hear them, they don't stop. Clara closed the book. Her hands were shaking. She returned for her next shift on October 15th. But the hospital was closed. Permanently. A fire had broken out in the early morning. Electrical fault, the news said. 3 dead. Dr. Vanek, Margie, and Brian the guard. No bodies were ever recovered. The fire had started on the 3rd floor. No one could explain how. Clara never worked in healthcare again. But sometimes, when she can't sleep, she pulls out Eliza Green's journal and rereads the final line she added herself. They only need one person to hear them, just one. Then they wait. It was supposed to be just a weekend getaway. A small break from the stress of deadlines, concrete, and the unbearable noise of the city. When Jordan agreed to join his friends Trevor, Mina, and Lucia on a rustic camping trip to Blackwood Hollow, he imagined cheap beer, campfire songs, and a few blurry photos they'd laugh about later. Instead, what he found was silence. A creeping kind of silence that seemed to pulse beneath the earth, saturating every twisted tree root and waterlogged leaf. Blackwood Hollow wasn't on most maps. You had to look for it, really look. An unmarked road off Route 27, obscured by overgrowth and a half-rotted sign that simply read, "Public access ends here." That should have been the first clue. The second was the way the locals looked at them when they asked for directions at the gas station. The cashier's eyes went flat, like a curtain had dropped behind them. "You going into the hollow?" she'd asked, voice tight. Trevor, ever the brave one, just smirked. "That a problem?" "No," she replied, slow and hollow. "But folks don't tend to come back." "The same. They all laughed then, even Jordan. Some locals were just like that, superstitious, cagey. It was part of the charm. The hollow was dense, thicker than any forest Jordan had ever seen. The air felt wrong, damp and heavy, like something was always watching. Still, they set up camp by the creek, roasted marshmallows, and cracked open cans of beer, convincing themselves it was just a normal, if slightly creepy, weekend. The first night was uneventful, peaceful even. The four of them drank too much and passed out in their tents. It was the second night when things began to shift. It started with the crows. Jordan was the first to notice. Hundreds of them, sitting silently on the branches above their camp. Unmoving, unblinking, watching, not cawing, not shifting, just there. Lucia woke up first and screamed. The canopy above their tents was pitch black with feathers and beady black eyes. Trevor thought it was funny and tried to throw a stick at them. The stick never landed. Instead, it just disappeared midair. "What the hell?" he muttered, walking forward. "Don't," Mina warned. "Don't go under them." But Trevor was already beneath the overhanging branches, laughing. "Maybe they're trained or something." That's when they finally moved. One crow leapt from its branch and landed squarely on Trevor's shoulder. It didn't caw or flap. It just stared into his face. Then another. Then another. Soon dozens clung to him, not attacking, just clinging. Trevor screamed, swiped at them, ran, and they followed. They didn't fly. They moved like a wave, always above him, just out of reach, always watching. The rest of the group didn't follow. They didn't know how to follow. When the crows finally dispersed and Trevor's screams faded, he was gone. Just gone. No footprints. No torn shirt. No trail. Just feathers. Hundreds of black feathers where he'd stood. The three remaining friends didn't speak for a long time. They packed up camp and began the long walk back toward the car, heads low, eyes darting to the canopy above. No cell signal, no GPS, and the trail gone. The worn dirt path they'd followed in was now just undergrowth and brambles. Lucia started crying. Mina held her tightly, whispering that they'd be okay. Jordan wasn't so sure. Night fell too quickly. The hollow grew darker than it had any right to be. No moon, no stars, just blackness, thick and cold. They decided to set up a second camp, just until morning. They huddled in one tent, the three of them pressed together. At some point, Jordan woke up to the sound of whispers, but they weren't coming from outside. They were coming from underneath them. He pressed his ear to the floor of the tent and froze, scratching, like fingernails against rock. Then a voice, low and gravelly. "Dig!" He scrambled back, waking the others. "There's someone under us," he hissed. Lucia screamed. Mina went pale. They burst from the tent with a flashlight and began digging at the dirt, half believing they'd find Trevor. Maybe he was trapped. Maybe he was hurt. Instead, they found stone, cold and slick, covered in etchings. The flashlight flickered. They didn't stop digging until the whole stone surface was exposed. It was a lid of some kind, a slab. Then the crows returned. A single caw split the air, a sound that seemed to tear through the silence like a blade. More joined in, then hundreds, thousands. The trees trembled with them. Lucia dropped to her knees, clutching her head. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" Mina grabbed Jordan's hand. "We need to leave. Now." But they didn't know where to go. Every direction looked the same. Every tree bent the wrong way. The ground felt soft beneath their feet, like walking on sponge. Then the slab shifted. They watched in horror as the stone began to slide open from beneath. No hands, no levers, just movement, as though the forest itself were breathing. And from the hole something rose. A figure, tall, wrapped in black feathers that glistened like oil. Its face was long and thin, almost bird-like, with deep hollow sockets where eyes should have been. Its arms ended in twisted claws. Its chest split and opened like wings. Lucia tried to run. The thing screamed, not a bird's caw, but a scream like metal on metal. Pure, vibrating terror. Trees bent inward. The air thickened. Lucia collapsed, writhing. The creature turned to Jordan and Mina. "You found me," it said, though its mouth didn't move. Jordan couldn't speak. His legs wouldn't respond. Mina stepped forward, trembling. "What are you?" Tilted its head. "I am the caretaker of this place. I am memory. I am hunger. You took Trevor." The thing didn't deny it. He was the first to see. See what? The truth. The break. The wound in the world that seeps and sings. The hollow is a scar, and I am the blood. Mina shouted. "We didn't mean to find this." The thing extended a claw. "But now you have. You heard. You dug." Jordan pulled Mina back. "Run." They turned and sprinted into the dark, the creature behind them gliding, not walking. The crows screamed above them, circling. They didn't know how long they ran. Hours, maybe. The woods twisted endlessly, always shifting. But eventually, miraculously, they stumbled out onto asphalt. The road. The gas station. They collapsed in the parking lot, sobbing. Lights flooded the windows. The same cashier stared at them through the glass. She opened the door and stepped outside, her face blank. "You got out?" she said flatly. Jordan nodded. Lucia was gone. They hadn't even realized she wasn't with them. The woman looked over their shoulders, toward the tree line. "He won't like that." 2 months later, Mina was found in her apartment, eyes clawed out, feathers clutched in her hands. The cause of death: unexplained trauma. Jordan hasn't slept through the night since. He hears scratching beneath his bed, whispers from his closet, and sometimes, just as he's falling asleep, he hears a single word: dig. He never went back to Blackwood Hollow, but he knows one day it's coming back for him. No one remembered building the Tall Pines Motel. Not the locals, not the city records, not even the owner himself. It was just there like it had always been. Off the highway near an overgrown stretch of pine forest, it stood squat and ugly with its rusted sign barely clinging to the frame. Tall Pines, daily, weekly, monthly rates. After Marla fled her apartment in the city, she needed somewhere quiet, cheap, and out of the way. The Tall Pines fit the bill. 1 week in room 209. That's what she paid for. Nothing more. She didn't ask about the smell in the hallway or the flickering lights or why every door was painted an off-putting shade of gray-green that reminded her of stagnant pond water. Room 209 was upstairs, at the end of the corridor. The window looked out on the back of the lot, facing the woods. There was a vending machine across from the ice machine and a sad, dented microwave near the stairwell. It was all wrong, but she was too tired to care. Her hands still trembled when she reached into her purse, every time thinking he might still be following. She bolted the door, pulled the curtains shut, and turned on the television. Just static. No channels. The remote was sticky. She turned it off and sat on the bed. That's when she noticed the window. Not the one facing outside, the other one. It was in the bathroom. Set high in the wall above the tub was a small, square window with an opaque pane of glass. It didn't face outside. When she opened the window and stuck her hand through, there was no breeze, no natural light, only a stale draft and a faint sound, like muffled breathing. She shut it quickly and stared. It made no sense. That wall should have backed up to the other guest room. She assumed it was just a maintenance duct or an old air shaft sealed off years ago. The motel was ancient. She didn't think much of it. Until that night. At exactly 2:09 a.m., Marla awoke with a jolt. No dreams. No sounds. just awareness. The bathroom light was on. She hadn't left it on. She sat up, her heart thumping in her chest. The air felt colder. She crept to the bathroom and stared into the yellow glow. The window was open, not cracked, wide open, and someone had written on the mirror in condensation. "We saw you." She didn't scream, couldn't. Her body locked up, her legs wooden as she backed out and slammed the door shut. She didn't sleep again. In the morning, the note on the mirror was gone. The window was closed. She convinced herself it had been a dream. Stress. Trauma. Maybe she left it open after all. But the next night it happened again. 2:09 a.m. light on. Window open. Mirror message. "We're coming." Marla didn't sleep the rest of the week. She tried calling the front desk. No answer. She knocked on the neighboring rooms. No response. She looked out into the parking lot and saw her car, untouched, but no other vehicles. She never once saw a housekeeper or a guest, even though lights were on in some of the rooms. The vending machine now only held items with no labels, just blank silver wrappers. By the 5th day, she was hallucinating. She'd hear knocks from the wall behind the tub. Not loud, panicked knocking, soft and rhythmic, like a pattern. She recorded it on her phone, but the audio never saved. She tried to leave, but every time she walked down the stairs, she found herself back at the second-floor landing. 3 times in a row, she stopped trying. Instead, she watched the clock. 2:09 a.m. Every night. The light, the window, the message. "You belong here now." Marla began tearing apart the room. She pulled back the mattress, unscrewed the vent covers, pried the plastic sheeting off the light fixtures. No answers. Just more decay. Finally, she taped the window shut with duct tape, sealed it completely, pushed the dresser in front of the bathroom door. She even carved tally marks into the nightstand every time 2:09 passed without an incident. 1 night passed, then 2. She thought she was safe. But on the 7th night, the TV turned on by itself. Static again. But this time the screen moved. Shapes formed. Not images. Eyes. Hundreds of them. Blinking and rolling across the static like fish beneath ice. Then a voice. Soft. Male. "You don't get to leave." The lights went out. Marla screamed, but the sound didn't escape her throat. Her body locked, jaw frozen. In the bathroom, something banged once, twice. Then the window shattered. Not glass reality, because behind it wasn't the wall to room 210. It was a hallway, a corridor that stretched on, filled with doors, each one identical. Each one marked 209. A hand reached out, then a second. They dragged themselves out of the void, figures. Dozens of them. Pale, silent, twitching. They had no mouths. Just long, stringy hair and sunken, lidless eyes. She tried to run. The floor became a thick black sludge, grabbing her feet like quicksand. Her screams melted into gurgles. Then everything stopped. Sunlight. Morning. Marla sat bolt upright on the bed. No sign of anything. Window sealed. No shattered glass. TV off. Bathroom door intact. She ran. Down the stairs. Into the parking lot. The sun was real, bright, hot on her skin. Her car started. Her GPS worked. She drove until she saw other people again. But the motel was gone. She returned with police 2 days later. Nothing there. Just trees. No clearing. No foundation. No structure. Records from the local registry showed no business by that name. Ever. No Tall Pines Motel. Not in the past 30 years. Marla now lives with a therapist. She sleeps with every window covered, every mirror removed. Still, sometimes at exactly 2:09 a.m., she wakes up. Not from a nightmare, but from a sound. The faintest knock. From inside the wall. When Marcus took the seasonal job at Hollow Root Tree Farm, he thought it would be easy money. Cut some pines, haul them into trucks, maybe smile at a few families picking out their perfect Christmas tree. It was supposed to be simple, but Hollow Root wasn't like the other farms. It wasn't even technically listed. The only reason Marcus found it was because of a crumpled flyer posted at a dive bar in a nearby town, 2 hours outside of where he lived. Help wanted tree harvest, $35/HR, overnight shifts. No address, just a number. He called. The voice on the other end didn't sound quite right. Flat, emotionless, but he needed the cash. They gave him coordinates, not an address, and told him to be there before dusk. Marcus arrived just as the sun dipped behind the endless rows of pine trees. The Hollow Root Tree Farm stretched on in all directions like a green ocean, the trees unnaturally uniform, too straight, too still. There were no birds, no insects, just cold wind and that strange hum, like a freezer running behind your ears. The foreman, if that's what he was, didn't give his name, just handed Marcus a pair of gloves, a lantern, and a rusted axe. Stay on the path. Cut only marked trees. If you see the one that smiles, don't stop. Don't look. Keep walking. Marcus laughed, thinking it was a joke. The man didn't. Night fell quick in Hollow Root. By the time Marcus began his shift, the stars were already swallowed by thick clouds. The lantern cast only a small yellow circle in the vast blackness between the trees. The path was gravel, lined by rows of red flags stuck in the dirt. The trees with white ribbons were to be cut. That was the rule. Simple enough. He made good progress the first few hours, dragging freshly cut pines back to the drop site near the foreman's shack. But then he saw the man. Not a customer, not a coworker, just a figure, about 20 yards off the path, standing perfectly still between two trees. He wore a long black coat that looked soaked through, like he'd crawled out of a swamp. His face was pale, reflective almost, and the smile, it stretched from cheek to cheek, teeth far too long, too clean. Marcus blinked. The man was gone. He convinced himself it was just his mind playing tricks in the low light. He didn't tell the foreman. But the next night he saw the man again. Closer this time. Watching. Smiling. That night, a tree was missing from the lot. One of the harvested ones. The foreman said nothing, but Marcus noticed. So did another worker, Jamie, a short guy with nervous eyes. He whispered to Marcus while they were loading stumps into the burn pit. You seen it too? Jamie asked. The grinning one? Marcus didn't answer. Jamie continued, voice low. Don't look at him. Don't stop walking. That's how he gets in. He waits for you to stop. Once you stop, he's allowed. Marcus didn't want to believe it. But by the third night, things were getting strange. Tools disappeared from the shed. The path behind him sometimes shifted. Lanterns flickered out for no reason. And the grinning man came closer. Closer still. Now within 10 feet. Never moved. Never blinked. Just smiled. Then Jamie vanished. No one mentioned it. His gloves were still on the hook. His name tag still hung in the break room. But no one spoke his name again. That night, Marcus made a decision. He was done. No job was worth this. He went to the foreman and said he wanted out. The foreman just stared at him, then slowly nodded. You can leave, he said. But you need to walk out the way you came in. It sounded reasonable. But something in the way he said it chilled Marcus. He took his lantern and headed back along the gravel path. The same one he'd arrived on 4 nights ago. Only now it seemed longer. The trees loomed closer. The wind louder. He passed the same knot of stumps 3 times. The lantern began to dim. Then he saw the smile. Off the path between 2 trees, brighter than the lantern. White teeth gleaming. Marcus quickened his pace. The figure moved with him. Not walking, just appearing, always 10 feet away. And then his foot hit something. A body. Jamie. Eyes wide. Mouth stretched open. Face frozen in a silent scream. A branch jammed down his throat like a gnarled wooden tongue. Marcus turned, sprinting now. The path was gone. The flags were gone. Just trees. Trees and that horrible grin. He ran until he collapsed. And woke up back in room B of the worksite trailer. His boots still on, covered in frost. There was no sign of the foreman. No workers. The place was empty. Abandoned. He stumbled outside to the drop site. All the cut trees were still there, rotted, sagging, smelling like meat. He took one last look at the woods. The grinning man stood there, still smiling. Marcus didn't remember the drive home. Just miles of gray road and static on the radio. When he finally reached town, he went to the sheriff. They'd never heard of Hollowroot Tree Farm. No such business. No such land. No satellite images. Just forest. Nothing but forest. Marcus doesn't sleep anymore. Not for more than a few minutes at a time. Every mirror in his apartment is covered. Because sometimes when he blinks too slowly, he sees that grin in the reflection. And it's getting closer. The Hartley family moved into the house at 227 Mayberry Street on a cold January morning. Snow clung to the rooftops like a warning. The moving van got stuck in the driveway, and the previous owner, Mrs. Helene Birch, hadn't bothered to clean. Dust coated everything, and the walls smelled like mothballs and pine cleaner. Still, it was a Victorian-style beauty, if you squinted past the peeling paint and tilted shutters. David Hartley didn't care. His wife, Maren, was 5 months pregnant, and they needed to leave the city. They'd lost the last 2 babies to complications. This one was going to be different. Fresh start, he'd said. Quiet, Maren whispered, pressing her hand against her belly. Safe. The first night, the house groaned. David joked about old plumbing, shifting beams, but Maren didn't laugh. She kept staring at the vents, specifically the one in the nursery. Did you hear it? She asked around midnight. Hear what? Whistling. David listened. Nothing. You're tired, he said, and she nodded slowly, though she didn't look convinced. But the next night he heard it too. It was subtle, just a gentle whistle, like wind through a crack. But it wasn't random. It rose and fell like a tune, a melody, one that repeated. He checked every window, sealed, every vent, clear. He climbed into the attic and stood in the cold darkness. Nothing, just cobwebs and the lingering smell of mothballs. Still, the tune returned. Always around 1:13 a.m. That night, Maren spoke to it. She was half asleep, her voice drowsy. But she whispered, "Hello," and something whistled back. 3 sharp notes. Happy. Almost like a bird's call. David sat upright in bed. Did you hear that? Maren nodded. It answered. They told themselves it had to be the furnace. Or pipes. Or the wind. But the tune never matched natural patterns. It followed them room to room. Played when David was alone. It hummed when Maren cried at night, clutching her swollen belly. They didn't talk about it after the 3rd week. Pretended it wasn't happening. But it got harder to ignore. David began waking up with blood in his ears. Once his pillow was soaked. He saw a doctor. Nothing wrong. Maren's pregnancy began progressing rapidly, faster than normal. Their doctor was baffled. You're measuring nearly full term, she said. But it's only month 6. Then came the knocking. Always soft. Always rhythmic. From the walls. From inside the closet. From the nursery door. One night, David stood outside the nursery and knocked. 3 times. And something knocked back. He tore open the door, nothing there. Just toys. Crib. Window shut tight. But the whistle came again. Soft. Sweet. David moved to sleep downstairs. Marin refused to leave the nursery. "She likes it in here," she whispered one night. "She? The baby. She's calm when the song plays." David wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because it was true. Marin's stress dropped when the melody played. The baby's kicks steadied. Her color improved. But the house felt heavier. Then came the night of the scream. Not from the baby. From the walls. David woke to a shrill, piercing cry, wet and high-pitched, like a baby being skinned alive. It started in the vents, traveled through the floorboards, ended at the nursery. He bolted upstairs. The door was wide open. The crib empty. Marin stood in the center of the room, smiling softly, her nightgown soaked in red. "She came early," she said dreamily. David looked down. Nothing in her arms. "No baby." "What happened?" he gasped. "She's here now," Marin whispered. "They gave her to us." "The who?" "The house." Marin collapsed. Blood pooled beneath her. David rushed her to the hospital. They found no fetus. No sign of delivery. But they did find something. A scar along her belly, neat and precise. A perfect surgical line. The doctors had no explanation. They admitted her to observation. David returned to the house alone. The whistling waited for him. Now it was louder, closer, played new notes, sadder ones. David searched again. The vents, the attic, even under the floorboards. In the basement, he found a door he'd never seen. A small wooden one, barely big enough for a child. Nailed shut. No handle. Just a keyhole. He broke it open with a crowbar. Inside, a crawlspace, lined with small chairs, stuffed animals, toys from another era, wooden horses, rag dolls with button eyes, and bones. So many bones. Tiny skulls, infant jaws, dozens. On the wall, scrawled in chalk, "The song keeps them sleeping." David fell back, vomiting. When he stumbled back upstairs, the front door was wide open. Marin was home, but she wasn't the same. Her eyes were too wide, too still, her steps too light. "She's in the nursery," Marin whispered. He walked to the room. The crib was full now. Something shifted beneath the blanket. A noise, part whimper, part chuckle. He lifted the blanket and found a thing. Not a baby. A shape with skin. Pale, glistening. Eyes too dark. Mouth too wide. It smiled. And it whistled. Officer Lena Whitaker had been working the night shift on I-85 for almost 7 years. Routine patrols, the occasional drunk driver, a few deer accidents, that was the rhythm. Predictable, dull, and mostly quiet, until she found exit 197. It wasn't on the official map. Not in any logbooks. Just a narrow ramp between exits 196 and 198, curving into thick woods with no signage and a cracked, sun-bleached road. She'd never noticed it before, and Lena noticed things. The night she found it, she'd been chasing a white sedan reported for reckless swerving. The vehicle took the turnoff, exit 197, without braking. Lena followed, sirens off, the trees thickening around her like walls. Her radio began to crackle. GPS lost signal. After a minute, the road curved sharply and revealed a parking lot. Empty, crumbling. At its edge, a building sat sunken into the ground like it had been there a century. A small sign out front, faded and rusted, read, "Highway Patrol Substation B, authorized personnel only." The white sedan was parked beside it, door open, interior light on. Engine off. No one inside. Lena called it in, but the static on the radio grew louder. She climbed out of her cruiser, her boots crunching on gravel. The air smelled stale, like mildew and rusted metal. The sky above seemed off, like the stars had moved. or vanished entirely. She drew her flashlight and entered the substation. The lobby was sterile and yellowed with age. Plastic chairs lined the wall. A water cooler stood in the corner, half full but murky. A long hallway stretched deeper into the station, where the walls grew darker. "Hello?" she called. "State Patrol. Anyone here?" No answer. The lights flickered overhead. Some were broken, others buzzed softly like insects trapped behind glass. She passed a break room empty, a locker room damp and mold-streaked. Then she found the first body. A man in civilian clothes, crumpled in a corner. His mouth was open in a silent scream, eyes wide, skin an ashen blue-gray. His arms were bent wrong. His fingers curled tightly inward, as though he'd clawed at something before dying. Lena called for backup again. More static. She checked his pockets. Wallet ID James L. Bristow. No license. The address led nowhere on the GPS. When she tried calling the number on his emergency contact card, her phone locked. Entirely. Blank screen. No reboot. Further in, she found the holding cells. 3 of them, each with something inside. Not someone, something. The first was empty, save for an enormous pile of fingernails and teeth. Human. The second held what looked like a uniform, state trooper blues, but filled with something wrong. It moved, squirmed inside the fabric, though there was no flesh, no bones. Just shifting fabric rising and falling, like breath. Then it stopped moving as she approached. The third cell's glass was fogged. Lena hesitated. Something tapped once from the inside. She raised her weapon. Slowly, she opened the sliding panel on the cell door. Inside sat a child, maybe 9 years old, hair damp and stringy, eyes hollow. "You have to tell them you saw it," the girl whispered. "Saw what?" "The station." "I'm reporting it now," Lena said. "No, you don't report this place. You warn people. You bury it. You forget." The child vanished. Not in a puff. Not with a sound. Just gone. Like she'd never been there. Lena backed away, chest heaving. Her flashlight dimmed again. The station groaned. Then she heard voices. Dozens. Overlapping. From inside the walls. Calling her name. She turned and ran. Back down the hallway, past the empty lockers, past the body, past the car in the lot. Her cruiser was still there. She jumped in and slammed the door shut. But the engine wouldn't start. The world around her darkened. The building behind her now pulsed, breathed, and something moved inside. Something tall and jointless. It scraped the ceiling as it passed a flickering window. The air outside pressed inward. The forest leaned closer. Then the headlights of her cruiser blinked on by themselves. And the radio crackled. "You're not supposed to be here." The voice wasn't hers. Wasn't dispatch. It was like gravel sliding over wet stone. She hit the gas. The cruiser jolted forward. Suddenly, daylight. She was back on I-85, near mile marker 196. No sign of the ramp. No road. No station. No parking lot. The car she'd chased? Gone. But when she pulled over to collect herself, she saw something new. Etched into the asphalt at her feet. Substation B, exit 197, and her dashboard radio? It hasn't worked since. Except at 3:33 a.m. every night. When it turns on by itself. Plays a faint voice. "Tell them you saw it, or it will find someone else." It started on a Wednesday night. The kind of dull, gray evening that settled over the city like a wet blanket. Devin Mullins, 31, single and 2 months into unemployment, had spent the better part of the day staring at job boards, chewing cold pizza, and watching late-night cable reruns in his tiny third-floor apartment. The apartment was forgettable. 2 rooms, 1 window, paint peeling from the corners. He couldn't afford much better. Rent was overdue, and his electricity bill was next. But what he did have, what he clung to, was his old 1980s RCA wood-paneled television set. It weighed 100 pounds and had no remote, but the picture was beautiful when it worked. The sound was warm, rich, comforting, a relic of his childhood. He never questioned how it still picked up local channels even though the world had gone digital. That night, after watching a string of crime procedurals until his brain went soft, the picture on the TV fizzled into static. Nothing unusual, but the static didn't behave. Pulsed, in time, like breathing, slow and steady. Then came the click. Devin flinched. The TV knob turned by itself. The volume rose just slightly. He stared, frozen as the static shimmered, shifted. Then something formed. Not clearly, not immediately, but slowly, unmistakably, a face. At first just an impression, eye sockets, a hint of mouth. Then features sharpened. A narrow face, skin stretched thin. No hair, deep, empty sockets that flickered as the screen buzzed. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. Still there. It didn't move, just watched. Okay, he muttered. This is a dream. He stood, grabbed the power cord, yanked it from the wall. The screen went dark, but the face remained, pressed faintly into the black glass. Devin screamed, stumbling backward. Then, without power, the screen lit up again, and the face smiled. A slow, deliberate curling of lips, too wide for any human jaw. He dropped the cord, ran to the hallway, banged on his neighbor's door. No answer. All the lights in the hallway flickered. The bulb above him popped. He returned to his apartment. Slowly, cautiously. The TV was off now. Silent. He crept closer, touched the screen. Cold. No face. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he unplugged the TV, dragged it down 3 flights of stairs, and left it beside the dumpster. Done. That evening, there was a knock at his door. 3 soft raps. No one there. He closed the door. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. No message. Just a photo. A grainy, low-res image of his apartment. Taken from inside. Facing the door. The timestamp read 3:16 a.m. He dropped the phone. For the next few nights, nothing happened. No static. No knocks. Then, on Saturday, the power went out during a thunderstorm. He lit a candle, tried to sleep. Around 2:00 a.m., the air turned cold. The kind of cold that sinks into your spine and stays. And from the living room came the crackle. Static. Faint, but unmistakable. He stepped out of bed, heart hammering. The RCA was back, sitting in the center of the room, plugged into nothing. The screen alive with white noise. The face was there, clearer now, and this time it spoke. You brought me home. Devin screamed. The lights exploded back on. The TV burst into flame. He doused it with water. Black smoke filled the room. The screen shattered. Glass sprang across the floor. Firefighters arrived 20 minutes later. They found him outside, shirtless in the snow, muttering to himself. The fire report listed the cause as electrical anomaly. The fire inspector shook his head. Thing had no power, no plug, shouldn't have even turned on. The RCA was hauled away, scrapped. But Devin never got better. He started seeing static in mirrors, in the reflection of his phone, in puddles on the street, faces flickering. One night, police found him trying to pull his eyes out in an alley, sobbing. I didn't invite it. I didn't want to see. They committed him. 6 months later, a new tenant moved into his apartment. She never owned a television, never watched one. But the first night she slept there, she woke up to the sound of static coming from inside the wall, and someone whistling, low, slow, watching. In the worn-down, 5-story building on Halbert Avenue. People didn't ask questions. Rent was cheap, maintenance was non-existent, and the superintendent never knocked. The walls were thin, and the hallways smelled like bleach and wet paint that had dried 40 years ago. But it was quiet, mostly, until the sound started. Unit 6B had been empty for months. The last tenant, Mr. Solomon, an old, hunched man with cloudy eyes and a breathing tank, had passed away alone in December. The paramedics took 3 days to find him. Since then, the apartment had remained dark and uninhabited. That is, until late one night in May. Eli Weaver, who lived across the hall in 6C, was reading on his couch when he heard the noise for the first time, soft at first, like the rumble of static underwater. He paused, listening. It wasn't music. Not quite, but it had a rhythm. Not coming from his apartment. Not from below. Across the hall. Unit 6B. He pressed his ear to the door. Pulsed. A deep, resonating hum. Almost like chanting. Voices layered over each other in overlapping whispers. Some high and distant, others deep and guttural. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt massive, like it came from beneath the building, like the walls were vibrating with it. He knocked. No answer. He called down to the front desk. No one picked up. The overnight security guy, Glenn, usually slept in the lobby bathroom with a space heater and a stack of wrestling magazines. Eli considered calling the cops, but what would he say? There's a weird humming sound coming from an empty apartment. Instead, he recorded it on his phone. When he played it back, the sound was gone. Nothing. Just silence. And then a whisper. Not one he heard in real time, but only on the recording. A whisper that spoke directly into the mic. He hears it now. Eli didn't sleep. The next day, he asked around. The woman in 6D, a nurse named Hannah, had heard it too. She said it began around 3:33 a.m. and ended exactly 13 minutes later. I thought it was a dream, she whispered. Eli shook his head. It's not. And it's not music. She leaned in. Then what is it? He didn't answer. That night he stayed up and waited. Put his phone on record. Sat on the floor with his back to the wall. 3:33 a.m. The sound returned. This time stronger. And something else, footsteps. Inside 6B. Slow. Wet. Dragging. Like bare feet on tile. He stood and tried the knob. Unlocked. That's when he made his mistake. He opened the door. The apartment was dark. No lights. No furniture. Just walls and a floor soaked in a thin layer of liquid oil? Blood? He couldn't tell. The smell was wrong. Burnt hair and metal. He took one step inside. The door slammed behind him. Darkness swallowed him whole. He flicked his phone's light on. The room was bigger now. Much bigger. Not apartment-sized, warehouse-sized. Endless. Walls stretched far away, with pulsing veins along the surface, like the interior of a throat. Shapes moved at the edges, tall and spindly. Inhuman silhouettes that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Eli screamed, ran. But the room looped. No matter how far he moved, he never reached a wall. He tripped. Fell. The phone skittered across the slick floor and landed face up, still recording. And through the speaker, he heard, "Now you belong to the sound." The figures approached. And then light. Eli woke up in his own bed. Clothes dry. Phone beside him. The recording still there. No sound. Just white noise. Except when he reversed it. Backwards, the track became clear. The whisper again. We are in the static between. After that, Eli stopped leaving his apartment. Food piled up outside his door. He covered every vent and crack with duct tape. Poured salt in every doorway. The humming never stopped. Day or night. One evening, Hannah knocked on his door. He didn't answer. She slipped a note under the door. I heard the sound too. I went inside. but it let me go. Why you? He wrote back, because I listened. That was the last note either of them exchanged. 2 nights later, the humming stopped altogether. For everyone except Eli. No one ever saw him again. But the maintenance guy, weeks later, trying to access 6B to paint it for a new tenant, found something carved into the back of the closet. The door stays open if you hear too much. There was no closet before, and there hasn't been a new tenant in 6B since. But the building still hums softly at 3:33 a.m. If you press your ear to the door, you'll hear the sound. And if you really listen, it will hear you back. On the outskirts of Mather High, behind the crumbling football bleachers and the overgrown track field, there's an old drainage tunnel. Technically, it's a storm culvert, large enough to walk through, carved into the hill, used decades ago to redirect rain runoff before the city rerouted the entire sewer system. It's not on any of the newer campus maps. The opening is half covered in ivy. But everyone who went to Mather before 2002 knew it. And every kid in that town had heard the stories. The dare was simple: walk through the tunnel from one end to the other. About 300 yards. Pitch black. Supposedly haunted. Someone always chickened out. Until Alex did it. He was a sophomore, skinny, quiet, a little angry. The kind of kid teachers wrote off but never really noticed. No friends. No enemies. He kept to himself. And one night, just before Halloween, he announced, unprompted, that he'd walk the tunnel alone. "You don't need to prove anything," said Craig, the loudest of the football guys. But Alex just looked at him. "I want to see her." Everyone laughed. He waited until after midnight. A group of students gathered at the tunnel entrance with flashlights and phones. The dare had become a spectacle. Alex stepped into the tunnel with nothing but a small lantern. An old one, oil-burning, like from a camping store in the 70s. He vanished into the dark. No one followed. The legend said that if you reached the center of the tunnel, you'd find a door that wasn't there before. Wooden, hinged, covered in symbols. If you knocked, she'd answer. The girl who drowned. She was supposed to be a student. Years ago. Fell during a storm and was swept into the culvert. Body never found. People said her spirit haunted the tunnel. Angry, lonely, calling out. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. No Alex. They called his name. Echoes came back, warped and sluggish. An hour in, they called the cops. Search teams came. Flashlights. Dogs. Ropes. No trace of him. No blood. No body. The tunnel wasn't even that long. A straight line. Nothing to get lost in. But he was gone. Just like the others. Because Alex wasn't the first. Only the latest. What most people didn't know was that the tunnel had been bricked up once before. Back in 1974. A wall built into both ends. Reinforced with concrete. City records showed no reason for the closure. But students remembered. They remembered the girl. Not just drowned. Sacrificed. The urban legend spoke of a group. A small cult posing as a school club. Who believed the tunnel was a thin place. Where the dead could be spoken to. Where something waited on the other side. And the girl? She had gone in willingly. No one saw her again. But every few years, someone tried to find her. Someone heard the whispers. Someone followed the rumors. And every time, someone disappeared. Years passed. The entrance was covered with ivy. The school built new bleachers. The stories died down. Until this year. Until Jenna. She was a junior. Smart. Skeptical. She didn't believe in ghosts. Her sister had dated Alex once. Briefly. She thought he was weird, but sweet. His disappearance never sat right with her. So she went looking. She found the tunnel. Still open. Still dark. She didn't tell anyone she was going in. She brought rope, a flashlight, extra batteries. A voice recorder. She left her phone behind. Inside, the tunnel was quiet, cold. The air tasted of rust and mildew. She walked 30 steps, then 60, then 80. The world narrowed to a pinpoint behind her, the entrance now just a speck of gray. The flashlight flickered. She stopped. A sound. Dripping water. And then, humming. Soft. Female. A lullaby she didn't know. She turned off her light. The sound grew clearer. From ahead, she stepped forward again. Slowly. One hand brushing the wall, the other gripping the recorder. Then she saw it. The door. Exactly as described. Old wood. Brass handle. No hinges. Just a door standing at the center of the tunnel. She knocked. Once. Twice. Silence. Then, come in. The door creaked open by itself. Inside was black. Deeper than any dark she'd ever seen. She stepped through. And vanished. The next day, police found her rope, neatly coiled. Her flashlight batteries drained. Her recorder still running. On the tape, 30 minutes of breathing. Then a voice. Her voice. It's not a girl. Then laughter. Not hers. Wet, deep, ancient. Then silence. Jenna's body was never recovered. They sealed the tunnel the next week. Welded plates over the entrance. Filled it with concrete. No ceremony. No press. But late at night, if you park by the edge of the football field and kill your engine, you might still hear humming. Coming from under the ground. Soft. Sad. Waiting. There are houses people whisper about. Houses that never sell. Homes that keep the curtains drawn and their histories buried in city records too vague to feel real. The Ridgeway House was one of those places. It stood at the top of Thornhill Street in a cul-de-sac surrounded by manicured lawns and plastic garden flamingos. Where the other homes were beige and modern, Ridgeway was ancient. Stone facade, warped porch steps, and a second-story window that always looked open, even when closed. The last family moved out in '95, or rather disappeared. Since then, it sat vacant. Maintained by an absentee trust fund. No real estate agents. No tours. No renters. Until it was given away. Jared Hayes received the deed by mail after his uncle's passing. He hadn't seen the man in years and didn't even know the property existed. No return address. Just a single note. It belongs to your line now. Do not leave after dark. Lock the doors. Do not look into the mirror after midnight. And do not open the guest room. Jared laughed. He was a rational man, an architect with no patience for ghost stories. He saw the house as a rare inheritance. A quiet place to live while freelancing. Something to renovate. Flip, maybe. He moved in on a Wednesday. By Sunday, he was planning to run. The house was clean but strange. No insects, no signs of decay. But the air smelled faintly of cedar and burnt paper. The floors creaked too rhythmically. The lights dimmed on their own. Not flickered, dimmed, like someone was turning a dial. And the mirror in the upstairs bathroom? It had a thumbprint on the inside of the glass. He tried to clean it. Came back. Each night at 12:03 a.m. One night he stayed up to watch it. Set a camera. Watched the live feed. At exactly 12:03 a.m. his own reflection blinked. But he didn't. He turned on the light. The reflection smiled. Slowly. Too wide. Then returned to normal. The next morning the footage was corrupted. He removed the mirror and stored it in the garage under a tarp. Still he couldn't sleep. Because every night, from the hallway, he heard footsteps. Not just walking, dragging. Like a limp. And then the guest room doorknob would jiggle. He hadn't opened that room. He remembered the letter. It was the only door in the house that didn't creak. Didn't resist. It was smooth. Too smooth. One night, unable to resist, he sat outside the door and listened. Nothing. Then a tap. light, repetitive. From inside the room, he pressed his ear to the wood, breathing, long, slow, too deep, and then, "Are you awake yet?" The voice was close, right behind the door. He ran, tried to sleep downstairs, but the thermostat dropped to 42 degrees by itself. The windows locked on their own. In the morning, the guest room door was ajar, just a few inches. Inside, nothing, just a rocking chair, still rocking, and the mirror, the one he'd hidden, now mounted on the guest room wall. Jared began researching. The Ridgway house had a long, fragmented history. Built in 1864, used briefly as a private home, then a tuberculosis sanatorium, then an orphanage that closed suddenly in 1918 after staff complications. One name came up repeatedly: Nathaniel Ridgway. He was listed as the original owner, the first superintendent of the orphanage, and somehow its last. He was known by many names in local folklore, but the kids called him the Night Man, said he'd visit rooms where kids didn't sleep, said he only appeared in mirrors or behind closed doors, always dragging one foot, always smiling. One entry in an old orphanage ledger, barely legible, said, "The Night Man's room must never be opened. He walks freely when invited." Jared packed his things that night, planned to leave before sunset. But as he stepped out the door, his phone rang. Blocked number. He answered. A voice he recognized as his own whispered, "You let him out." The call cut. He dropped the phone. The front door slammed shut behind him. Wouldn't open again. He smashed a window, saw his reflection watching from the glass, unmoving. He slept in the foyer that night. At 12:03 a.m., the rocking chair upstairs began creaking, and footsteps came down the stairs, dragging, one by one. He didn't wait. He ran into the basement, locked the door, waited till dawn. In the morning, the house was silent again, but there were footprints, black, wet, in a line through the living room, leading into the guest room. That night, Jared walked to the cul-de-sac, left his keys in the mailbox, never returned. But some say the lights still turn on at 12:03 a.m. in the Ridgway house. Some say if you knock 3 times on the guest room door, you'll hear breathing. And some say the mirror in the guest room smiles before you do. Brimstone Lake wasn't marked on most state park maps. You had to know about it, either from locals who didn't like to talk about it, or from stories swapped around dying campfires by kids too brave or too stupid to be scared. It wasn't always called that. The old maps just listed it as Black Hollow Reservoir. But sometime in the late 80s, after 3 separate drowning incidents in one summer, people started calling it Brimstone. No one really questioned it. Tom and Laura Matthews didn't know any of that when they booked the cabin. They were new parents, 35, exhausted, and desperate for a weekend away from noise and people and the never-ending rhythm of their city lives. Lara's mother offered to watch the baby for 2 nights, and they jumped at the opportunity. Cabin #4 sat a few dozen yards from the lake's edge, just a little lopsided, its wooden siding soft and damp. It wasn't much, but it had power, a wood-burning stove, and most importantly, peace. The first day was perfect. Hiking, coffee on the porch, no cell reception. They took a rowboat out into the lake, watched the trees ripple across the black water, and laughed for the first time in weeks. The second night is when things changed. It started with the freezer. Tom opened the fridge to grab another beer and paused. The freezer section, built into the top, was open. But not just open. Ripped. The metal door bent backward like something had pushed its way out. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. Inside, no frost, no ice, just darkness and a layer of melted water. And scratch marks, dozens of them inside the tiny compartment. Thin, frantic, like someone had clawed at the lining. "Lara," he called. "Did you Do something to the fridge? No, she answered from the porch. Why? No reason. He closed the door. An hour later, it was open again. Lara saw it too this time. That wasn't open earlier, she said. I know. She shivered. Is the heat on? It's 70 in here, but the air felt cold, like a draft that came from the floorboards, the kind of cold that moves, not settles. They slept restlessly. At 3:11 a.m., Lara woke up to the sound of water dripping. She padded into the kitchen. The freezer was open, again, and standing in front of it was a figure, small, shivering, his back to her. It looked like a child. Tom, she whispered. The figure slowly turned. It had no eyes, just deep, black holes in a face stretched tight and shiny with frost. Its mouth opened in a long, silent scream. Lara screamed. Tom bolted in, fists raised. No one there, just the freezer, wide open. No footprints, no wetness, nothing. They didn't sleep again. In the morning, Tom wanted to leave. Lara agreed. They packed. But when they tried to start the car, the engine clicked. Nothing. The battery was dead. They checked their phones, no bars. Hiking out would take hours, and a storm was coming. They could see it rolling in across the lake. Dark clouds like bruises blooming on the horizon. Just one more night, Lara said. Then we hike out at first light. They kept the lights on, built a fire, sat back to back on the couch. At 2:00 a.m., the fire went out by itself. No smoke, no embers, just darkness. Then the sound started. Click, drag, click, drag. From the kitchen, Tom stood up slowly. Don't move, he whispered. A figure stepped into the light. But it wasn't a person. It looked like a man once. Tall, broad-shouldered, but hollow now. His limbs cracked when he walked, joints stiff like frozen meat. His eyes were bright white, shining like ice under moonlight. He opened his mouth. Frost blew out. And then he pointed. At the freezer, the old appliance began to shake. His door creaked. The frost inside curled outward like mist. And a sound came from it. Knocking. Something was knocking from inside. Tom grabbed Lara's hand. They ran. The front door refused to open. They smashed the back window and climbed out barefoot, stumbling through the snow-dusted grass toward the tree line. Behind them, the cabin groaned. From inside, dozens of voices began to whisper. They didn't say words. Not exactly. But they all shared one thing in common. Colder, colder, colder. Tom and Lara ran through the woods until sunrise. They flagged down a forest ranger on patrol by a fire road. He didn't ask many questions, just stared at them tight-lipped. When they mentioned cabin #4, the man sighed. I told them to tear that place down, he muttered. What was in the freezer? Tom asked. The ranger looked at him. You ever heard of a cryopod? Tom shook his head. They were experimenting. Back in the 60s. Government stuff. Sub-zero human trials. Failures, mostly. They buried the whole thing. Except one unit. It didn't shut down. They froze someone? Lara whispered. They froze something, the ranger said. And whatever it was, it's still dreams. They didn't go back. No one rents cabin #4 anymore. It still stands, but now the freezer door is bolted shut with steel bars. And if you stand outside it right after dusk and press your ear to the wood, you'll hear it. The knocking. From the other side. Waiting to thaw.